In the late 19th century, the American West was a boiling cauldron. The gold rush, railroads, and dreams of expansion pushed thousands of settlers into lands that had long belonged to indigenous nations. Among those nations were the Ute, an ancient people of the Rocky Mountains. In 1879, a brutal clash of cultures, ideologies, and greed would erupt into one of the bloodiest and most tragic episodes in Colorado's indigenous history, the Battle of Milk Creek and the Meeker Massacre. This is the story of a forgotten war, a conflict that marked the end of the Ute presence in their own homeland. The Ute had lived across vast regions of what is now Colorado and Utah for generations. They were hunters, warriors, and diplomats, intimately familiar with every valley, mountain, and river of their territory. But with the expansion of the United States, their land began to shrink. Treaties were signed, and nearly always broken. In 1868, the U.S. government granted the Ute a reservation in Colorado, but in return, demanded they abandon their traditional ways. No more horses, no more hunting, no more ceremonies. They were to become Christian farmers. Enter Nathan Meeker. An idealist, a journalist, and a devout Christian, Meeker believed he could civilize the Ute. Appointed as Indian agent at the White River Agency in 1878, he arrived with a mission to turn the Ute into peaceful Christian farmers. But his utopia quickly became authoritarian. He banned horse racing, a core cultural practice for the Ute. He tore up horse pastures to plant crops. He threatened to cut off food rations to anyone who refused to obey. To the Ute, this wasn't help. It was cultural extermination. Tensions rose week by week. Meeker refused to distribute food. He insisted that farming was the only acceptable way of life. He even got into a physical altercation with a Ute spiritual leader. Terrified, Meeker wrote to the military, begging for reinforcements. But to the Ute, this wasn't a plea for safety. It was a declaration of war. General William Sherman, yes, the same from the Civil War, ordered troops to be sent in. In late September of 1879, nearly 200 soldiers marched out from Fort Steele, led by Major Thomas Thornburg. As the army approached the White River Agency, Meeker still insisted things were under control. But the Ute had already made their decision. They would not allow armed soldiers to enter their lands. On September 29th, as the troops crossed a small stream known as Milk Creek, they were ambushed. Horses bolted in panic. Bullets flew from every direction. Major Thornburg was killed within minutes. The Ute, skilled and determined, opened fire with deadly precision. The remaining soldiers scrambled for cover behind wagons and the bodies of dead animals. The Battle of Milk Creek had begun. 4 days, roughly 150 soldiers held their ground under constant assault. They were surrounded, low on food and water, and under relentless fire. Men died slowly. Animals collapsed in agony. Morale disintegrated. Desperate for help, a few soldiers slipped away at night and rode over 140 miles to summon reinforcements. Finally, on October 2nd, the first backup arrived. The legendary Buffalo Soldiers, the all-black 9th Cavalry. 3 days later, nearly 500 more troops led by General Wesley Merritt reached the battlefield and broke the siege. But what happened at Milk Creek was only half the tragedy. While the army was bleeding in battle, the White River Agency itself fell into chaos. The Ute attacked. Nathan Meeker and 10 of his staff were killed. The agency buildings were burned to the ground. But contrary to the sensational headlines calling it a savage massacre, the Ute spared the women and children. They were taken as hostages, not prisoners. Among them were Josephine Meeker, Nathan's daughter, and her mother, Arvilla. They were protected, watched over by Chipeta, the wife of Chief Ure. Josephine would later say that Chipeta's kindness saved her life. The nation was stunned. Newspapers cried for revenge. Politicians shouted, "The Utes must go!" Even Chief Ure, who had always pushed for peace, couldn't stop what came next. Under intense pressure, the Ute were forced to sign a new treaty. In 1880, most of them were removed from Colorado and relocated to remote land in the Utah Territory, stripped of their homeland. Chief Ure died a year later, in 1881. some say, of a broken heart. The Battle of Milk Creek and the Meeker Massacre marked the end of Ute resistance in Colorado, and it signaled the broader collapse of indigenous autonomy in the Rocky Mountains. For decades, history painted the Ute as violent aggressors. But today we know better. Nathan Meeker may have meant well, but he imposed his vision through force and cultural erasure. The Ute defended their land, their freedom, and their identity, just as any people would. Today, the descendants of the Ute live on in southern Colorado and Utah. They still sing, they still dance, they still remember, and in the quiet valleys of Milk Creek, if you listen closely, you might still hear the echo of what was lost, and a warning we have yet to truly understand.